After a preseason win over the Green Bay Packers, stock is up in Jet special teamers, some young guys looking to carve out bigger roles, and both lines. Locked on Jets begins now.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Tuesday, August 12th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day, and a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Well, the Jets preseason in 2025 got off to a great start on Saturday night. The Jets dominated the Green Bay Packers. And on today's show, we're going to talk about whose stock is up after the big win. We're going to talk about some guys in the third phase of the game, special teams, who really stood out. We're going to talk about some young players who helped their cause to earn playing time in 2025. But we're going to begin by talking about the most basic part of football, the trenches. The Jets won in both trenches, particularly when the starters were in the game on Saturday night. And that was the biggest reason the Jets starters dominated the Packers starters. And we can start by talking about the Jets offensive line. We've discussed a lot over the last couple of months about how important offensive line play will be for the New York Jets. Now, it's the NFL. Offensive line play is important for every single team. If you can't control the trenches, it's very difficult to move the football. But this is a New York Jets team with a quarterback who is trying to raise his game to the next level in Justin Fields. And it is a New York Jets team that is not particularly blessed at the skill positions. There are a couple of good players at the skill spots. You know, Garrett Wilson's obviously a very good number one receiver. Jets have a pretty talented backfield with Breece Hall, Braylon Allen, and Isaiah Davis. Mason Taylor's a tight end with promise. But if you stack the Jets skills players versus the skill players of the other 31 teams, you're going to find a group that's probably near the bottom of the league. And that means the Jets really need to lean on the offensive line. The Jets need to control the trenches more than your typical team. And the Jets controlled the trenches on Saturday night. And I think that the most promising performance was by Armand Membou, who blocked 10 times on passing plays, allowed 0 pressures. Now, that does not mean Armand Membou is automatically heading to the Hall of Fame. We should not fit him for his gold jacket just yet. He should not prepare his speech in Canton, Ohio, 15 years from now. There's a long way to go. 10 snaps in an exhibition game, not that big of a deal. But what it does show us is the first sign that Membou is ready to start. I like to look at the preseason as kind of like a long story. That was chapter 1. And I will tell you that in the past, I've watched rookie offensive linemen, and sometimes you can tell within a few snaps that they're just not ready to play. Doesn't mean that they won't eventually be ready to play, but sometimes you see a rookie offensive lineman in like 5 snaps in the preseason game. He just looks totally overmatched, totally in over his head. And you know what, there's going to need to be some seasoning. They're going to need to work with him on the practice field before he can play. That was not the impression you got with Membou. Membou looked like he was ready to go. But overall, the offensive line did an excellent job. They opened up some big holes in the run game, and Justin Fields was only pressured once on 6 dropbacks. And he held the ball for over 3.5 seconds, which is quite a long time to hold the ball. So if you're holding the ball that long and not getting pressured, your offensive line is doing an excellent job. And by the way, this is not the Jets' projected starting offensive line because John Simpson is out. So the Jets shifted Joe Tippmann to guard and had Josh Myers playing center, which also shows you that the Jets actually are one of the rare teams, at least on the interior of the offensive line, that has depth, because Myers is an experienced starter. Myers was playing against his former team on Saturday night, but Myers is a guy with 3 years of starting experience and has been a pretty decent center through his career. I don't think he's as good as Joe Tippmann. I am expecting Tippmann to eventually win the starting center job. But the Jets are the rare team that can survive an injury on the interior offensive line. I think Myers was a sneaky good signing by this team. Saturday night helped to display it. I know, look, the starters did not play very long. It was not much action, but still a very encouraging start for the Jets starting offensive line. The defensive line, there was also promise there. And more significantly, you saw some guys step up at a position where the Jets need help, and that's defensive tackle. Quinton Williams is great, but After Quinn Williams, you've got a lot of question marks. I mean, Jets signed a couple of guys. They signed Coward. They signed Nandi this offseason, but neither of those guys is a particularly great player. But the Jets had two standout performances at the defensive tackle spot. One was by Leonard Taylor, who had a strip sack that turned into a touchdown. Leonard Taylor was one of the stars of last year's exhibition season. He ended up earning a roster spot as a result of how well he played in the preseason games. This year, the mission's a little bit different for Taylor. We can presume he's probably going to be on the roster because he's young, he's talented, and he's got upside. The question is how much upside? We saw last year that Taylor can be a number 4 type defensive tackle. A guy you give a handful of snaps to, he's going to hold his own, he's going to play credible football. That's a very good result for a non-drafted rookie. Can Taylor take his game to the next level this year? Can he be a guy who can be a top part of a rotation of the defensive tackle spot? Can he handle more snaps? Can he be a number 2 or number 3 defensive tackle? Because that's what the Jets need right now. After Quinn Williams, there's a lot of uncertainty. And another guy who really stepped up, Jay Tufele. Tufele was a guy they brought in, not a big name at all. And he had a sack and a half. He looked really good. And it's not just about the numbers in preseason, because sometimes you see a guy produce big stats and it's done in a way that's not going to be repeatable at all during the regular season. Sometimes they're just facing inferior competition. Sometimes, you're in the third quarter and you're playing guys who, are borderline practice squatters and you dominate them. Sometimes, you just kind of like fall into a lucky play where, you're rushing a pass or you kind of get stonewalled by the offensive line, but then the quarterback runs right into you. That's not what happened with Tufele. Tufele showed good technique. He showed some ability with pass rushing moves to get to the quarterback. Really promising start for him. So I think, for Taylor and Tufele, the question is, how do you build on this? Because Leonard Taylor last year against Washington had an excellent first exhibition game. And had he not built on that, he may not have made the roster. And this is true across the board. What we saw on Saturday night, both on the offensive line and the defensive line, was nothing more than a first step for the New York Jets. But it was a very, very positive first step because, as I said earlier, the game of football, it's about winning in the trenches. There's a lot of aspects to football, but none is more basic than physicality at the point of attack. And if you can control the point of attack, you're going to win games in this league. A Jets offensive line that on paper has a lot of upside and could be very good, looked very good in limited action on Saturday night. A Jets defensive line, which has some question marks on it. One of the question marks at the defensive end position. Defensive end got a boost yesterday because the Jets officially activated Jermaine Johnson off the physically unable to perform list. I talked about that on yesterday's show, so you can go check that out. Check out what I had to say about that on the Monday edition of Locked On Jets. But defensive tackle is a huge issue with the Jets heading into training camp and heading into the preseason and heading into the regular season. Because if anything happens to Quinn Williams, has to miss time, it isn't clear who's going to step in and be able to play effectively. And on Saturday night, you got performances out of Taylor and out of Tufele that were at least the first steps in suggesting maybe they can handle a bigger role. And maybe the Jets have more than Quinn Williams at the defensive tackle position. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, there are more positions than the trenches. Trenches are very important. Offense, defensive line, both premium spots, but there are other spots. And the Jets had standout performances at other positions on Saturday night. Guys who are young, guys who are inexperienced, and guys who stated the case that maybe they deserve a little bit more playing time. We'll talk about who they are as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. It's the best time of year. NFL kickoff is almost here, and that means fantasy football season is back in full swing. And this year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. And this year, me and Locked On Jets are playing Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league. I've used Yahoo Fantasy for over 20 years, and the updates they're rolling out this month are wild, and I mean that in the best way. To celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout August. To kick it off, they just dropped the Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to make fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week until there's one team left standing. With the season just around the corner, now's the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. If you're more into the classics, you can still play head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football right now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. If you're a Jets fan, you had to love what you saw on Saturday night. The Jets dominated the Green Bay Packers. On today's show, we're talking about whose stock is up on the Jets roster after that. And I think that there are some young players who are vying for a greater role on the team who really helped their cause on Saturday night. I'm going to start by talking about Braylon Allen, who's the second-year running back out of Wisconsin. In some ways, I guess you could argue Saturday night's game was kind of a homecoming. Allen ran 8 times for 33 yards on Saturday and broke a couple of nice runs. Now, Allen certainly was helped by the way the Jets' offensive line was playing. We talked about the offensive line in the first segment. The Jets really controlled the trenches, but Allen got off to a really positive start. He looked explosive. He looked decisive in the holes. And I think that it's important for Allen to perform well in the exhibition season and early in the season because I think that at some point the Jets are going to need to settle on 2 backs for their rotation. Aaron Glenn has suggested that the Jets are going to have a 3-headed monster out of the backfield, Breece Hall, Braylon Allen, and Isaiah Davis. And I think that there's a logic to that in the early part of the season because you don't want to run anybody into the ground. You want to keep everybody fresh, especially as guys are kind of getting their footing, as guys are getting into football shape. But I think as the season progresses, it's unlikely you're going to have 3 standout backs. Probably 2 are going to separate themselves from the pack. And you're eventually going to want to make sure your best guys get the most carries. So my feeling is that at some point, the Jets are probably going to go from a 3-man rotation to a 2-man rotation. And essentially that means that there's a bit of a camp battle that will probably extend into the regular season, through the first couple of weeks of the regular season. Because I do think early in the season, just to keep everybody fresh, there will be a 3-man rotation. The position battle for the number 2 back spot kind of began Saturday night, and it was a very good performance by Braylon Allen. And I think it's between Braylon Allen and Isaiah Davis. I think Breece Hall is going to be the Jets' number 1 back. So it's a question of Allen versus Davis. Allen had a lot of success. Davis was not as consistent on the ground Saturday night, although Davis did make a nice play. If you saw Justin Fields' touchdown scramble, Davis made a really savvy play. Davis was running a route, and there was a guy covering him. And Davis kind of pretended like the ball was in the air. He put his hands out as though he was going to make a catch. So the guy covering him wouldn't turn around and tackle Fields. So that was a really savvy play by Davis. And sometimes when a team has a mobile quarterback, they build things like that into certain plays. If a quarterback scrambles, you run this fake, or they build certain rules into what you should do if the quarterback scrambles. So I actually wonder whether Tanner Engstrand put that in. And Fields scrambles, receivers pretend like they're still going out in the pattern and they're getting the ball thrown to them. So did want to give Davis a shout out for that. That was a very nice play. I do think Braylon Allen though helped his cause with his performance Saturday night. Another guy who I think is vying for a bigger role is Stone Smart, who's a tight end the Jets brought in from the Chargers, a converted college quarterback who first converted to wide receiver and then converted to tight end. So second position change within a couple of years for Stone Smart. He scored a touchdown on a 24-yard screen pass. Now, the reason I think that this is significant is I anticipate the Jets are going to be one of the most likely teams in the NFL to throw screen passes because there needs to be more variety in the playbook. Jets are going to run the ball a ton this year. The Jets are going to be probably one of the run-heaviest teams in the NFL. And the conventional drop-back passing game for the Jets is not going to be their strength. Not with Justin Fields at quarterback, not with this group of wide receivers. Jets need other ways to throw the ball well. What the Jets have a lot of good running backs. And the Jets have a lot of good running backs who can catch the ball out of the backfield. So they'll be involved in the screen game. But adding the tight end to the screen game is also something that's helpful. Jets may throw screens to Mason Taylor. Right now, the number 2 tight end is Jeremy Ruckert, not a guy who's particularly dynamic with the ball in his hands, not a guy you want to throw a ton of screens to. So enter Stone Smart. I think that there's going to be a package. I think the Jets are going to have a very diverse set of screens. They're going to have a lot of different wrinkles, a lot of different types of screen passes they'll throw in the playbook. Stone Smart's profile is kind of an athletic tight end. That's my theory as to why the Chargers let him go is that he's not like a traditional Jim Harbaugh tight end. Jim Harbaugh likes his tight ends to be able to do everything, including block. Harbaugh loves those heavy formations where you play traditional power football. That's not really Stone Smart's game. Stone Smart's more of an athletic guy. He profiles as if he succeeds in this league, he's a converted quarterback. If he succeeds in this league, he'll be more of a pass catching tight end and perhaps a guy who's dynamic with the ball in his hands. And I think that Stone Smart, if he continues to show he can make plays after the catch, could be part of, could find a role when the Jets run screen passes this year. And I think there are going to be an awful lot of screen passes for the Jets. Moving on to quarterback, Adrian Martinez, I thought, played a really solid game. And I think the competition between Adrian Martinez and Brady Cook for the number 3 quarterback, Adrian Martinez took a huge step toward earning the job. He just looked way more comfortable than Cook did in running the offense on Saturday night. He looked more comfortable in the pocket. There was much more zip on his passes. I came away from that game thinking Martinez is head and shoulders above Cook. I'd also say that I think Martinez has shown a lot of improvement from a year ago. A year ago, when he had some success in the exhibition season for the Jets, but he was more like a scramble first guy. It was like he sometimes it felt like he wasn't even like getting to his first read before he took off. He looked much more comfortable navigating the pocket. Like, he wasn't fantastic. I'm not saying he was Joe Montana. I'm not saying he was Tom Brady, but he looked much more comfortable navigating the pocket than he did a year ago. And I don't know that Martinez is going to be more than the number 3 quarterback, but based on what I saw Saturday night, Martinez did have the makings of a number 3 quarterback. And what I want out of a number 3 quarterback is a guy who can run an offense for maybe half a game to a full game before, the defense catches up with him. And based on the attributes we saw from Martinez on Saturday night, I think, that's a possibility with him. And I think that clearly he's head and shoulders above Brady Cook right now. If Saturday night replays itself over the next 2 games, Martinez is going to be the number 3 quarterback, and Brady Cook's probably heading to the practice squad. And the last guy I wanted to mention was Donovan Edwards. And Edwards trying to earn like the 4th and last spot at running back, and I think it went a long way towards doing that. He gained 42 yards on 9 carries. He ran tough. He also had a long touchdown. He had a 73-yard touchdown that got taken off the board on a holding penalty. Now, you could say, well, he wouldn't have broken free without the holding. Well, that's possible, but he also showed an extra gear. And that's what Donovan Edwards brings to the table is a lot of speed. He brings pass catching ability and speed. But on Saturday night, we also saw some toughness from Edwards. We saw some physicality in his runs. And we can probably presume the Jets are going to keep 4 running backs, and 3 of them are locks. Breece Hall, Braylon Allen, Isaiah Davis. Eric Glenn said that they're all going to be important parts of the team, which probably leaves, we can presume, 1 spot open. I know some people may think the Jets are only going to keep 3 running backs, but a lot of teams keep 4. And I think especially a team that's going to be so run heavy is going to keep an extra back around. And it very well could be Donovan Edwards. And I think if he keeps playing like he did Saturday night, that will go a long way towards earning him a roster spot. Now, I think Edwards' role is really going to be, if he ends up carving out a spot on this team and he ends up carving out a role, it'll be more as a pass catcher. I think he's going to be the mold of a guy who comes in on passing downs and makes plays out of the backfield. You try and get mismatches against linebackers. He won't be used so much in the conventional run game because the Jets have Hall, Davis, and Allen. But it's nice to see that Edwards can at least flash the ability to be a productive guy on the ground because he does have that home run speed. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about the third phase of the game, which you may find unexciting, but it is critical. Special teams wins games and special teams loses games. And the Jets had some special team standouts on Saturday night who went a long way towards earning a roster spot or a different type of role on the team. We'll talk about it as we continue here on this Tuesday edition of Locked On Jets. Episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Monarch Money. Have you ever wished managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. I have to admit, I'm really bad at signing up for subscriptions, particularly to streaming services, and then forgetting them. Well, Monarch Money can help you if you're like me and you do that. And it can help you in so many other areas. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Tuesday. We are talking about whose stock is up for the New York Jets after a dominating week 1 of the preseason performance against the Green Bay Packers. And when a team plays that well, there are an awful lot of people whose stock is up after the game. But let's focus on special teams. Special teams is an area I'm very passionate about because I don't think it gets enough credit for how it impacts teams winning games and losing games. Around 20% of all plays come on special teams. And one of the things I've appreciated with the Jets in recent years, and I think it's continuing under Aaron Glenn, is the Jets have considered it, and I think the Jets will consider to continue to focus on special teams and make that a part of their roster decisions when they figure out who are the final guys they're keeping on their roster. And there were some excellent performances on special teams Saturday night. I'm going to start off by talking about a guy who I'm not expecting to make the 53-man roster, but a guy who could end up on the practice squad. And that's Harrison Mevis, the kicker out of Missouri. Mevis started training camp with a chance to earn the Jets' place kicker job. I think that's unlikely now that the Jets have brought in Nick Folk, because Folk is a proven veteran. Folk is a guy who's been in the NFL a long time and had a lot of success in the league, and a guy who, frankly, if you look at the numbers, has been one of the best kickers in the league over the last 5 years. Mevis made all of his kicks. Now, there were a couple shaky kicks, but he put them through the uprights. He did not miss a kick. I'm a big believer now with the expanded practice squads, with the practice squads going up to 16 players. You should use one of those spots on a backup kicker. And the reason I say that is anybody involved in special teams will tell you that there's a certain rhythm, a certain chemistry a long snapper, a holder, and a kicker need to have. And these guys are professional. You can sign a guy in season and they make it look easy, but you want to make sure a kicker is as comfortable as possible. And if you keep a backup kicker on your practice squad, if something happens to your starting kicker, the number 2 guy can go right in, and he will have worked with the long snapper and the holder in practice every single day. It'll be a much smoother transition. And given how many games are decided by less than one score in the NFL, last year was actually 60% of the games. And usually, a typical year, it's around 50%. Last year, it was around 60%. You want your backup kicker as comfortable as possible. If you have to make a move in season, you'd rather it be a guy a guy who's comfortable working within your infrastructure. So we'll see how Mevis does the last two preseason games. But look, he made all his kicks. Some of them were a little shaky, but he did not miss anything. He did not fail. Another guy who I thought really stood out was Qwan'tez Stiggers. In fact, I've declared that I think Qwan'tez Stiggers probably helped his roster chances more than any other player on Saturday night, because he made 2 big tackles. He made a tackle that pinned the Packers deep in their own territory on a punt. He tackled former Jet Mecole Hardman, who had a really rough night. And then he made an open field tackle on a kickoff. And Stiggers is a guy who's kind of been viewed as on the bubble, because when the Jets drafted him in the 5th round a year ago, the perception was Robert Saleh was kind of training him to take over a starting role. DJ Reed was going to be a free agent after last year. 2025 comes, Qwan'tez Stiggers steps into a starting role. In fact, Robert Saleh has been quoted saying he thinks Qwan'tez Stiggers will be a starter in the NFL. Well, Aaron Glenn and his coaching staff come in, and it seems like they have different ideas. They've signed Brandon Stevens in free agency. They bring in Azareye'h Thomas as a 3rd-round pick in the NFL draft. He's like the new Jets developmental corner. Feels like Stiggers could be the odd man out. There's always a spot on a roster for a guy who can play special teams, especially when you get down the depth chart. How often is your number 4, number 5 corner going to see the field on defense? Not that much. If you can make a big positive impact on special teams, that's worth keeping you on the roster. And it gives you a chance to develop at your natural position. If Stiggers sticks on this roster for special teams work, he gets to continue working on the practice field to develop as a corner. And maybe one day he will get his chance. Excellent performance by Stiggers. Based on what I saw Saturday, I'm much higher on his chances making the roster. And I would say even based on Saturday, he probably should be on the roster. Another guy who I thought played well on special teams, Jamarcus Weston. This is good. If you've been following the last couple of months on this podcast, Jamarcus Weston's kind of my guy. He's an undrafted signing out of Florida. If you look at his positional listing, it was a very interesting. It had a very interesting positional listing on the roster. He's a guy who was listed when the Jets signed him as in the UDFA as a wide receiver / defensive end / safety / gunner on the punt team. You don't see that quartet that often. First of all, you usually don't see a guy listed as a gunner as his natural position on the punt team. But you also don't see a guy who's played wide receiver, safety, and defensive ends. That's not a normal combo. Weston's a really athletic guy who struggled to find the natural position in college, but he earned rave reviews for his play on special teams. In fact, his college coach, Billy Napier at Florida, at one point even said that Weston's going to make the NFL as a special teams coverage guy. He's that good at it. And the Gators tried to figure out a different way to get him involved on offense, on defense, use his athleticism. never really panned out, but he was always good on special teams. Weston recovered a muffed kick by Hardman. Rough night for Mecole Hardman, a guy who made very little impact during a brief Jets career, was traded early in the season in 2023 and probably did more to help the Jets on a Saturday night than he did in all the games he played for the Jets in 2023. But Weston showed hustle. Weston jumped on a fumble. And, I think that, again, that's another thing that will be a point in his favor. I could see a scenario where Weston ends up on the practice squad. And he kind of becomes a guy that, he becomes a guy who gets elevated to play special teams, because I'm not sure Weston's necessarily going to be a guy who's in danger of being claimed by another team. But if he has a big preseason on special teams, maybe the Jets end up throwing a roster spot his way. At the very least, I think he's going to find some sort of role on special teams for the Jets this year. And Saturday night was a good example as to why. So, really across the board, this was an outstanding performance by the New York Jets. This was everything you wanted it to a first preseason game to be. And we know that, look, it's exhibition season. It doesn't matter. We will not remember this game once we get into September, October. We probably won't even remember this game a week from now, because the Jets are playing the New York Giants this coming weekend, and the focus will turn to that game very quickly. But a very good performance across the board for the New York Jets. They controlled the trenches on both sides of the ball when the starters were in. They had some young guys who flashed and made a case to earn bigger roles on this team going forward. And they had some guys stand out on special teams, something that's dear to my heart. An excellent game. You got to be happy with that, with what happened Saturday night if you're a Jets fan. But that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. And if you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, please give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Tuesday, everybody, and send in your mailbag questions. Tomorrow we're going to do our weekly mailbag. I can't wait to answer your questions. Talk to you then.